When a crime is caught on video, it gives investigators a much better chance of apprehending the culprits, since the video evidence can be closely scrutinized in an effort to identify them and bring them to justice. Many criminals have come up short, not realizing that they were being filmed by CCTV security cameras, dash cams, police body cameras, or members of the public who had their phones at the ready at just the right time. But not all crimes that are caught on camera are always solved. This could be either due to a pure stroke of luck, where the criminal's face is obscured from view, or because the quality of the recording isn't good enough to make a positive identification. Opening a new business is supposed to be an exciting and prosperous challenge, often meaning that the business owner has started a new chapter in their life that's full of promise and new opportunities. Sometimes a business owner will open a new branch of their company since their other location has been doing well, and this can also be a daunting experience, since it's impossible to predict how the new branch will fare in an untested location. But not everyone is always excited about a store opening in a new location, since some people are resistant to change and a new business could threaten that which they've grown accustomed to in the past. There are also some people who will do anything in their power to see such a business fail, as soon as possible, since it's located close to a store that offers similar products or services, and could cause a dramatic decline in the original business's profits. This is seemingly what happened to Mike Kellerman, the owner of the South Bay Blackwater Tattoo Parlor, which is located in Ocean Beach, San Diego, when his new shop was vandalized not once but twice in the span of just 2 days in November of 2019. Just a week after celebrating the official opening of the parlor, Mike arrived at the shop to open for the day when he noticed that someone had damaged the store's shop front window, and he immediately notified the police. Luckily, the shop had been fitted with CCTV cameras, and officers were quickly able to ascertain how the damage was inflicted, as the culprit could be seen in the clear footage, though his face remains hidden and he's not yet been identified. They found that the attack on the store occurred at 4:09 a.m., according to the surveillance system's timestamp, and in the footage, the vandal can be seen arriving at the store on a skateboard. The man has medium-length blonde hair and is wearing what looks like a white sweatshirt with dark-colored pants and white shoes. As he rides up to the store, he has one foot on his skateboard and the other on the ground. He then presses something against the window, making sure that it's affixed properly, before he sets it alight with a cigarette lighter. He then quickly jumps back on his skateboard and makes his getaway as fast as he can. Some people who have watched the CCTV footage believe this man has done this before, since he seems very comfortable with whatever the item is that he set alight, and he doesn't seem too concerned that it'll go off when he's still near it. A few seconds after the man rides out of the camera's view, the item that he placed on the window begins to spark, and a moment later lets out a small explosion that leaves a hole in the window that would not have been cheap to replace. About a minute after the deed is done, 2 pedestrians can be seen walking up to the store's window, after they spotted the hole that was caused by the blast. They discussed what they found and looked into the store through the hole, but walked away out of the camera's view. One of the men can be seen wearing a USC hooded sweatshirt and flip-flops that are branded with the Nike logo. Investigators have not stated whether these 2 men are linked to the vandalism, or if they're considered suspects, but they have asked that they come forward since they may have seen something that could have helped bring the skateboarder to justice. When interviewed by police officers, Kellerman stated that he had a feeling something like this was going to happen, since he had an altercation with the owner of a rival tattoo parlor just days before the incident, and he believes his new store was targeted because the other business owner felt that he may be taking customers away from his store. But this has not been proven. Kellerman said that he was approached by someone while he was in the process of getting the store set up, and they told him that he shouldn't open in that location, but didn't state why. Kellerman then told the apprentices who work for him that they should expect an incident such as this to occur, since he just had a feeling that his shop would be targeted in one way or another. He added that it would cost him close to $2,000 to replace the large window, but he refused to be intimidated, stating that he would continue to open despite this attempt to scare him away from the area. That night, Kellerman and his wife slept inside the shop to make sure that nothing got stolen before he had a chance to replace the window. But at some point, they had to step out to get something to eat, and this is when the store was attacked once again. This second culprit was also caught by the store's security cameras, and the footage shows a man dressed in dark clothing and what looks like a dark beanie, skating past the same window before throwing a cylindrical object at it, causing it to shatter for a second time. This vandal has also not been identified, since his face is blurred thanks to the lights that are shining behind him from a liquor store across the street. Kellerman has received support from the surrounding community, and if anything, will now see more business because of the incident, derailing any plans that the vandals had of scaring him into moving to a different area, since the store has received a lot of press coverage following the incident. No arrests have been made in the incident, and no suspects have been identified, but Kellerman has reiterated that he won't be moving anytime soon, and that he will continue to open his store every day despite the attacks. If you saw anything that night, or recognize anyone in the CCTV footage, or have any information that can help investigators track these vandals down, you're asked to contact the San Diego Police Department at 619-531-2000 or 858-484-3154. Some criminals will take any opportunity they get to line their pockets with the hard-earned money of others, which is why it's always a good idea to invest in CCTV security cameras to keep your house or business as safe as possible. This will ensure that even if the premises do get robbed, you'll have video footage of the culprits that can then be turned over to the police, who will use it during their investigation, and in many cases, if the robber isn't immediately identified, they can ask members of the public if they recognize them. But even then, there's no guarantee that they'll be brought to justice, as criminals are always inventing new ways to obscure their identities while carrying out a crime. For example, wearing clothes that don't belong to them, covering their faces with masks or items of clothing such as hooded sweatshirts, or wearing a baseball-style hat and sunglasses. This is exactly what happened when a convenience store in San Pedro, Los Angeles was robbed by two men who have still not been apprehended or identified. This prompted detectives from the Los Angeles Police Department's harbor area to ask for the public's help in identifying them, as they were caught on camera while carrying out the crime. The incident took place on Sunday, the 27th of March, 2016. At about 2 a.m., two men can be seen on the store's security cameras approaching the store while there are no customers inside, which suggests that they were likely hiding nearby until any potential witnesses left the scene. They were captured by an outside camera as they were running towards the store from across the street. And just before they entered the store, one of the men looked directly at the camera, but the video quality is too poor to make out his facial features. One of the men is carrying a large firearm by his side, and they're clearly anxious, as they jostle with each other to get inside. Once they enter the store, though, their demeanor seems to change, and they look a lot more relaxed as they approach the employee who's standing behind the counter. Strangely, the store owner opted to have a poster put up directly between the camera and the counter, which means that the men are obscured from the waist up, but we can see one robber resting his forearm on the counter, while the other jumps over it, causing the employee to quickly step aside. The robber holding the firearm then keeps watch while the second starts to gather cash from the register, along with some items from the shelves, which he shoves in his pockets. But his friend is clearly more anxious than he is, as he starts to slowly make his way to the door, likely urging his companion to get a move on before the customers arrive. He then opens the door and checks the parking lot to make sure that they're still alone, after which they both make their way to a storage area in the back of the store, where the second robber grabs a few more items. Satisfied with what they were able to pilfer, the first man leads the way to the door, still holding the firearm, and his companion follows close behind. What happens next must have been a heart-stopping moment for the two criminals. As they open the shop's doors and step aside, two vehicles can be seen arriving in the parking lot. The robbers seem to hesitate for a moment but decide to make a break for it. The first man lifts the firearm in the direction of one of the cars for a brief moment, but he quickly changes his mind and decides it would be better to make a clean getaway rather than exacerbate the situation by pointing it at the motorist. They then run in the same direction that they came from and disappear out of sight with their ill-gotten gains safely tucked away. The arriving motorists seem none the wiser, which is probably a good thing, since a confrontation could have ended very badly. Investigators have released descriptions of the two men based on what was captured by the cameras, and the information given by the store employee. The first robber with the firearm is described as an African-American male who's estimated to be around 25 years old. He stands around 6 foot 2 inches tall and weighs about 200 pounds. He was wearing a black hooded sweatshirt, a white shirt, white gloves, and a white t-shirt, with black and white basketball shorts and black shoes. He also had a gray beanie. The second suspect seems a bit younger than the first, and he's described as an African-American male and is estimated to be about 22 years old. He's also a little shorter than the first man, but stands around 6 foot tall and weighs somewhere around 180 pounds. In the footage, he can be seen wearing a black hooded sweatshirt, black pants, and black and white shoes, and he has dark-colored gloves on his hands. If you recognize either of these two criminals, there are several ways you can report it to investigators. You can get in touch with Harbor Detective Acevedo at 310-726-0675, or with Harbor Detectives at 310-726-7900. If you'd like to submit a tip after hours or during the weekend, you can dial 1-877-527-3247. If you prefer to remain anonymous, you can contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. It can be easy for authorities to stay ahead of all the new techniques criminals use to carry out their crimes, since they find ways to use technology to make their misdeeds easier to carry out. But with the need to keep up comes the opportunity to use technology to their own advantage. And if they're able to stay one step ahead of these criminals, they can prevent a crime from happening rather than responding to it after the fact. One such piece of technology that has helped investigators in recent times is the use of drones to track criminals, or to catch them in the act. This not only aids in identifying the suspects, but often leads to their arrest at the crime scene, saving a lot of time that would otherwise have been spent on a long, drawn-out investigation. In the case of a cattle robbery in North Dakota, police made use of an unarmed predator drone to bring a tense situation to a close. The use of an unarmed predator drone was first authorized by Congress in 2005, but at this point, it was to be used by the Customs and Border Protection officers. These drones are able to carry out surveillance missions for as long as 20 hours at a time, without the need to land, and as an added bonus, they can fly high enough to stay out of earshot of anyone on the ground, while using state-of-the-art cameras to keep track of anyone they wish to follow or observe. One example of this played out on the 17th of August 2018 in Kelso, Washington, when a robber named William Leahy was spotted by one of these drones while he was doing his best to stay hidden from police officers, after he had cut through the fence of an impound lot and made his way inside, possibly to steal from the cars or to help himself to car parts, such as catalytic converters. A drone was deployed, and Leahy was quickly located as he lay on the ground between two of the cars in an attempt to hide. But his efforts were in vain, as he was quickly surrounded and taken into custody. In another more dangerous case from the 23rd of June, 2011, a predator drone was used to bring a tense situation under control in North Dakota, when Rodney Brossart, who claims to be a sovereign citizen, got into a standoff with police officers. On that day, 6 cows had wandered onto Brossart's 3,600-acre farm from a neighboring farm, and naturally the farmer who they rightfully belonged to expected him to return the cows to him, but Brossart refused, wrongfully claiming that they now belonged to him since they were on his property. This prompted the owner of the cows to contact the police, and the Nelson County Sheriff, Kelly Jenk, traveled to the farm with a search warrant at the ready. He made contact with Brossart and stated that he needed to search the farm, but Brossart refused, and together with his 3 sons produced a firearm, driving Jenk away from the property. With no other choice, Jenk called for backup, which arrived in the form of a SWAT team, highway patrol officers, a bomb squad, deputy sheriffs from 3 different counties, and ambulances. But they were unable to ascertain where Brossart and his sons were hiding. Given the size of the farm, they could find any number of hiding spots, and it would be dangerous for investigators to merely walk onto the property, since all 4 of the men were believed to have been armed. To aid in the search, they decided to call for a Predator B drone, which was unarmed. The following morning, the drone was sent 2 miles into the sky, where it would not have been visible to Brossart and his sons, where it started its surveillance mission. The four men stood little chance of remaining hidden, since these drones are so sophisticated that they're usually deployed in war zones and can operate under extreme conditions without any issue. It quickly managed to pinpoint Brossart and his three sons with the use of sensors that are located under its nose, and it was determined that they were all unarmed after all. This enabled officers to rush the property and take Brossart into custody, marking the first time that a US citizen was arrested with the use of drone technology. After his arrest, Brossart stated that he felt the use of drones in this manner was unlawful, and that his privacy had been invaded by investigators. His attorney backed up his claims, stating that the drone used during the operation was dispatched without judicial approval or a warrant. But this did little to help Brossart's case, as US District Judge Joel Med found that the use of the drone was carried out properly, and that its use had no effect on the charges that had been filed against Brossart. Brossart was found guilty of all the charges against him and sentenced to 3 years in prison, but he would only have to serve 6 months as the rest of his sentence was suspended. He was also ordered to pay a $1,000 fine. His 3 sons were also taken into custody and charged. They pleaded guilty to misdemeanor charges and each received a 1-year probation sentence. Brossart's wife and daughter were also arrested on the day of the standoff, but all charges against them were dropped. At his sentencing, Brossart acknowledged that he handled the situation badly and that he should have just returned the cattle as requested, as this would have avoided a tense and dangerous situation that put his family and the lives of law enforcement officers at risk. He took full responsibility for his actions and stated that he would do his best to ensure that a similar situation doesn't arise in the future. When someone is murdered, investigators usually look at those who were close to them, such as their husband, wife, children, or close friends who may have had a motive to end their life. But this approach can also be fraught with difficulties, since a motive isn't immediately clear, and since other people who know the suspect will likely vouch for them, since they find it unthinkable that they could carry out such a horrific crime, especially against someone they claim to love. But the truth usually eventually comes out, and the culprit can be finally brought to justice, as was the case when 46-year-old Shauna Shaf lost her life in an attack that was carried out at her house in Las Vegas. Shauna is described by her family as someone who loved to laugh and sing along with her 8-year-old daughter, Maddie. She was born in Salt Lake City, but moved to Los Angeles when she was 28 in search of a career in a city full of opportunity. She didn't have to wait long either, as she found a job as a cocktail waitress at the Palms Hotel Casino, one of the better-known casinos in the city. She instantly fit in with the other staff members and described the working conditions at the casino as being part of a large family. She was doing well financially, making as much as $100,000 a year with the added bonus of receiving tips during her shifts. In 2002, she met a firefighter named George who was spending time at the casino, and she instantly fell for him, as he seemed to be an all-American man who cared about his family, often sending money home to his mother to help care for his sister who was disabled. The pair quickly fell in love, and a year later, Shauna gave birth to Maddie. They would eventually get married 4 years into their relationship, and their marriage seemed idyllic as they seemed perfect to each other. For the next 2 years, they would live together happily, until George lost a lot of money in the housing market crash, and his demeanor started to change. He started criticizing Shauna and started showing jealous behavior. Shauna felt that he was critical of everything she did, including the way she dressed for work, and things only got worse when George hired a homeless man to complete small tasks around the house. She didn't trust the man, telling her friends that he creeped her out every time she saw him, and she couldn't understand why George decided to let this man into their home. Still, George kept the man around despite Shauna's misgivings. After 10 years of marriage, Shauna felt that the relationship had run its course, and she decided to move into a house of her own. She was uncertain whether she wanted a divorce, and in the meantime, the couple shared custody of their daughter. They decided to try and save their marriage by seeing a marriage counselor, and Shauna's friends state that she was hopeful that they would be able to return to normal and just be a happy family again. Then something strange happened that left Shauna shaken. Her house was broken into and her wedding ring was stolen, along with a pair of her bathing suit bottoms, which she found very strange. Even stranger, the burglar left a pair of boxer shorts behind for some reason, and she notified the police, but the burglar was never caught. But things were about to get far more sinister than a mere robbery. On the 29th of September, 2012, Shauna had just completed her shift at the casino, and she clocked out for work at 3:01 a.m., which was confirmed by surveillance footage from the casino. She then got in her car and made the 30-minute drive home where her life would come to an end. She walked into the house via a door in the garage and started making her way upstairs to her bedroom, but she would never make it there as she was attacked by someone wielding a heavy tool. Later that morning, at around 9 a.m., George arrived at the house to pick up something when he discovered that Shauna was deceased, and he made a call to 911. Investigators immediately considered George their main suspect, but when he was questioned, it was discovered that he'd been working a 14-hour shift at the firehouse, and he would have been at work while the attack took place. Shauna's fellow employees became concerned that the attacker may be singling out women who worked at the casino, and that they may target one of them next. To make matters worse, investigators had no leads and no way of identifying a suspect, as there were no witnesses who saw anything suspicious around Shauna's house, and no clues were left at the scene of the crime. But then they got a lead that they were not expecting. A man named William Penix contacted the police to report that a homeless man that he knew had contacted him and told him that he was the one who carried out the attack. Disturbingly, he seemed almost giddy when delivering the news, and stated that he would be receiving a lot of money for carrying out the crime, and that he would finally be able to leave Las Vegas to start a new life elsewhere. Penix added that he knew the man to be living in the mountains, and that he was trying to help him straighten out his life, since he had spent some time in prison in the past. He named the man as Greyhound, a nickname given to him because of his slim stature, and he could run fast. Investigators didn't know whether to believe Penix at first, since his story sounded too incredible to believe. But they were following up on every possible lead, and so they started looking for this Greyhound. Penix informed them that the man usually walks from his campsite to a local grocery store, where he's been known to pilfer as much food as he can steal. Detectives entered the store to ask if the man had been spotted that day, but they didn't have to search long, as Greyhound suddenly appeared out of nowhere to talk to Penix. Penix told him to stay where he was and ran into the store to alert the detectives. He was arrested without incident and was immediately interrogated. It would then come to light that his real name was Noel Stevens, but he maintained that they had arrested the wrong person in connection to the attack on Shauna. When he was arrested, officers found that he was carrying illegal substances, giving them the perfect excuse to keep him in custody while they searched for his campsite in the mountains. With the use of volunteers and a helicopter, they eventually found the site and confirmed that it was Stevens's when they found a pair of his pants lying nearby. They noticed that it had what looked like biological material on it, which would later be confirmed as belonging to Shauna, and they knew that they had the right man in custody. Knowing that Stevens would likely maintain his innocence despite the evidence that was found at the campsite, investigators told him that someone he knew had come forward to state that he had carried out the attack on Shauna. This clearly got the result that they were looking for, as he immediately confessed. But the case would take an unexpected turn when investigators took a closer look at Stevens' cell phone, particularly the contacts that he saved. One of the names that jumped out immediately was that of someone called George. Naturally, they asked who George was, and he replied immediately, "That's my friend, the firefighter." And they realized that this was the same homeless man that George had hired to work around his house. Members of Shauna's family contacted the police to state that they strongly believed George had a hand in her passing, and they traveled to Los Angeles to help out in any way they could. In the meantime, investigators discovered that George and Stevens had spoken to each other on the phone no less than 87 times in the month leading up to the attack, and they started to believe that Shauna's family was right. Penix would then reveal that Stevens had told him he received $600 from George to carry out the attack, and that he promised a lot more money when the deed was successfully done. Stevens confirmed this and added that George gave him the key to Shauna's house so that he could let himself in and wait for her to come home from the casino. At Stevens' campsite, investigators also came across a barcode that was found to correspond to the tool used to end Shauna's life. They discovered that it was bought from a Lowe's store, and they started sifting through security footage to find the person who purchased it. And before long, they spotted George and Stevens entering the store together and purchasing the tool. Stevens added that George had supplied him with a map to Shauna's house, making it easy to find, and he would eventually reveal the location where he buried the tool that he used during the attack. George was immediately placed under surveillance, even tapping his phone, which allowed them to monitor a call between George and his sister, after which he decided to flee. While making his escape, he crashed into a barrier and had to be taken to the hospital, but he made a full recovery and was taken into custody. George denied being involved in the attack, but he would be found guilty of planning the attack on his wife, and was sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Stevens would also be found guilty and sentenced to 42 years to life in prison. The popular saying goes, "Don't do the crime if you can't do the time." But many criminals who have been convicted of their crimes will go to just about any lengths to spend as little time in prison as possible, sometimes even resorting to an escape. These plans don't usually work out though, as most escaped convicts are usually rearrested just a short time after escaping, and new charges are then added to their sentence, ensuring that they'll spend even longer in jail. This isn't enough to deter many criminals from trying to escape anyway, as is evidenced by the actions taken by Eddie Villalobos, a 26-year-old man who stood accused of ending the life of his mother's boyfriend, 33-year-old Artemio Guzman Olvera in Cornelius, Oregon in 2021. The incident took place in the 2800 block of South Alpine Street, where Villalobos used a sharpened blade to end his victim's life. Immediately after the attack, Villalobos jumped into his car and fled the scene. When Villalobos' mother was intervened after the attack took place, she stated that Villalobos and his girlfriend were visiting her and Guzman Olvera, who lived together. Guzman Olvera had just arrived home after finishing his shift at work, when Villalobos suddenly charged at him with a sharpened blade and ended his life. Villalobos' mother added that she had no idea why her son decided to do this, as there had been no altercation between the two men, and there seemingly was no reason why he would decide to end his victim's life. After Villalobos and his girlfriend fled the area, family members contacted the police and administered first aid on Guzman Olvera until an ambulance arrived. He was then airlifted to a hospital since his condition was critical, but he would eventually succumb to his wounds despite the best efforts of doctors who attempted to revive him. In the meantime, Villalobos and his girlfriend made their way to Wilsonville, where they contacted two of their friends and met up. Sometime during their visit to one of the friends' apartments, Villalobos once again seemingly lost his temper and attacked the two friends with the same blade that he used in the attack on Guzman Olvera. Once again, there seemed to be no reason for the attack, as there was no disagreement or altercation, and it still isn't known why Villalobos decided to take the actions that he did. One of his friends had to be taken to the hospital to receive treatment, but not before he was able to call the police and report that it was Villalobos who attacked him. Following the second incident, Villalobos fled once more and traveled to Tigard, where his car was quickly spotted by officers who'd started to follow him. But Villalobos decided that he was being tailed, and he took off at speeds over 100 miles per hour, weaving in and out of crowded traffic. But he soon found himself stuck in traffic, and he decided to exit the car and flee on foot, leaving his girlfriend sitting inside the vehicle. He then managed to jump across a series of fences and made his way to a retirement village known as Summerfield. An elderly couple was shocked when Villalobos suddenly broke into their house and demanded that they give him clean clothes while he attempted to wash his hands and the clothing that he was wearing. Luckily, the couple received a phone call from a neighbor at just the right time, and they were able to quietly ask her to call the police, which she then did. Realizing that the police were on their way, Villalobos became angry and fled once more, making his way further into the retirement village, but he was soon located and taken into custody. When Villalobos' car was searched, investigators found clothing containing biological material as well as the sharpened blade that he used during both attacks, and his fate was sealed. Villalobos was charged, and a sentencing hearing was scheduled for the 20th of October, 2023, but the hearing would not go as planned. In footage from the courthouse, Villalobos can be seen as he arrives for his sentencing, accompanied by an officer who then proceeds to remove his handcuffs and shackles from around his ankles. This is done by Oregon law, since the defendant needs to appear before the jury without restraints, since they may sway the jury's opinion before they render a fair verdict.
But this gave Villalobos the opportunity that he was looking for. After his ankle restraints were removed, he walked over to a chair where he was instructed to sit. But as he arrives at the chair, he suddenly makes a break for it to the surprise of everyone in the courtroom. Cameras in the court's hallway then capture him running out of the courtroom and down a hallway, which could not have been easy since he was wearing formal pants, a button-up shirt, and formal shoes. But he doesn't seem to be too bothered by these items. Seconds later, a police officer can be seen running out of the courthouse in pursuit. But Villalobos has already turned the far corner and is putting good distance between him and the officer. A second officer quickly joins the chase as the first one turns the corner. But a third camera captures Villalobos as he makes his way through the building and past an unsuspecting person who has just entered the courthouse. He opens the courthouse's doors effortlessly while still running and makes his way outside with the first pursuing officer about 5 seconds behind him. An exterior camera then shows Villalobos bursting through the doors that are marked staff only. He eluded the police for several hours, and a shelter-in-place message was sent out to residents living in the area, warning them that a dangerous criminal was on the loose in the area. During the search, Villalobos was spotted by officers twice, but he was able to get away on both occasions. Drones were eventually brought in to aid in the search, along with canine units from 2 different police departments. Investigators then received a call from a resident who reported that a man was attempting to break a door down in an apartment complex. And when they arrived at the scene, they found the fugitive attempting to hide under a blanket inside of an apartment that was not occupied at the time. Thanks to his escape attempt, Villalobos had several extra charges added to those that he was already on trial for, and received a further 3 years in jail, along with the original sentences for ending Guzman Olvera's life. For that incident, he was sentenced to life in prison, and will only be eligible to apply for parole after at least 25 years served. The motives for the attack on Guzman Olvera and Villalobos' own friend are still unclear, but he had finally been caught and his crime spree had been brought to an end once and for all. It's well known that in the early days of photography, exposure times were extremely high. This meant light had to be hitting the material that was being used to create the photo for several minutes or even hours to capture the image. The very first photograph took between 8 hours and an entire day to capture. This was drastically reduced in just a few decades, but the long exposure times still led to some disturbing images as the subjects moved or came in or out of frame. It's often used to explain so-called ghost photos. But it's not only the moving subjects that can create somewhat eerie pictures, as was the case with the very first photo of a human being. The photograph was taken between April 24th and May 4th, 1938, in central Paris by inventor Louis Daguerre. Daguerre had worked closely with the man who took the very first photograph, and had developed a new technique that only took about 10 minutes for a photo to be captured. After much experimentation, he pointed his camera out the window of his apartment and took a photograph. It was a typical busy day. The area was known for its fashionable shops, cafes, and theaters where Daguerre worked. When Daguerre looked out his window, he would typically see people going about their business, walking up and down the street, or riding in horse-drawn carriages. But because the photograph took so long to develop, he didn't expect to capture anyone in it. But upon developing the photo, he discovered that someone had been captured. In the lower left-hand side of the image, on the street corner, the slightly blurred silhouette of a man can be seen. He has his hands behind his back and one foot up on a stool. It also seems like he may be wearing a hat. Also in the image, slightly blocked by a stand of a tree, is another person shining the man's shoes. Because the two stayed so still for 10 minutes, they were captured in almost as much clarity as the scene around them, while dozens of other people who were walking past disappeared. The two figures in the street didn't know the photograph was being taken and likely never saw the resulting image. Who they were was never noted down, and their identities have been lost to history, despite featuring in such an important image. It's worth noting that there are a few other people who can just be made out, including what appears to be a small child looking through the window at the top of the building. the curtain brushed aside so that they can get a better view. The photograph has become a symbol of resistance and protest around the world, with the exception of the country where it was taken, but the subject still remains a mystery. Tank Man, a chilling image of the end of a brutal day in Beijing in 1989, has remained anonymous for more than 30 years, and most disturbingly, we still don't know what happened to him. The story starts months earlier, with the passing of China's leader in April of that year. He'd been somewhat more reformative, but the new leader and government that came with him returned to cracking down on civil liberties and increasing government corruption. Thousands of students staged a hunger strike in Beijing. At first, the protests were peaceful. While there was a military presence, the soldiers themselves often mixed with the students, handing out food. But an upcoming state visit from the leader of the Soviet Union prompted the Chinese government to act swiftly in putting an end to the protests. The area was put under martial law, and the army swept in. The exact number of people who lost their lives is unknown, but a British diplomat residing in China at the time claimed the number was more than 10,000. It seemed to be less about crowd dispersal and more about crushing the demonstration, as the military went out of their way to make sure the injured did not survive. Protesters formed a human chain to try to stop tanks, but it did not work. Journalists from outside of China were restricted in the days leading up to the attack and were not supposed to be anywhere near it. A few American photographers were smuggled into the hotel that had a clear view of the scene that was unfolding. Afterwards, the photographs had to go to great lengths to make sure their images reached the real world. One hid a roll of film and a box of tea. Another hid his inside of a toilet before handing over a dummy cartridge. Many of the photos taken that day resemble a war zone, complete with burned out vehicles and swarms of people. But the most iconic photo would be that of an almost empty street with a lone figure standing in front of a line of tanks. Alongside the photo, there was video footage of a man who carried 2 shopping bags into the center of the street. He stood in front of the tank, only moving when the tank tried to go around him. After a while, he climbed up onto the tank and seemed to speak to those inside. Then he climbed down and walked away. What happened to him after that is a mystery. Some believe he managed to escape China, while others claim he was arrested shortly after he was out of view of the cameras and has not been seen since. The mystery is only compounded by the fact his identity is unclear. In the years since, the student was first used by the Chinese government as evidence of the restraint the army held, but it has since been censored by the government, as is the whole topic of what they refer to as the June 4th incident. The image of a soldier sat in the trenches during World War I has become synonymous with the term shell shock and is likely one of the most famous photos taken during the war. Who exactly he is and what happened to him after the photo was taken is unclear. The photo was taken during the Battle of the Somme. The Battle of the Somme was one of the most destructive and devastating battles in the entire war. Hundreds of thousands of people on both sides lost their lives for what amounted to little progress. The battle marked the beginning of the third phase, stretching from the 15th to the 22nd of September. It was the first battle to include the Canadian Corps and New Zealand Division, fighting alongside British and French forces on the Western Front. The photo itself is believed to have been taken sometime after the 16th of September, and shows medical orderlies tending to the wounds of their comrades. While disturbing to know how much destruction was going on around them, and how it's possible those men lost their lives not long after, the photo would likely become one of hundreds of thousands of forgotten images of the war, if it were not for the soldier on the left-hand side. The man has been described as having a crazed grin and a gleam in his eye that only comes from insanity. Given how many soldiers suffered from what they called shell shock due to the constant bombardment in the trenches, it wouldn't be surprising to learn the man was suffering from a mental illness. Others have pointed out the crazed look in his eyes is likely just the way his eyes shine on camera, similar to red eyes in modern images. They add that the grin could easily be him laughing at a joke, though it doesn't seem like the person closest to him is sharing his joy. And considering just how wide the grin is, it does seem a little disturbing. Who the man is and what happened to him is unknown. Most sources that identify him do so based on a comment on a rare historical photos forum. The commenter claims that the man may be Robert Lindsay Rogers, who was a member of the Canadian Army. On September 16th, Rogers was hit in the neck, but miraculously managed to survive and was taken to the trenches. He had blue eyes, which is likely why his eyes appear to glow in the picture. After a night in the trenches, he was evacuated to a hospital in Britain, only to pass away the following year during the Battle of Hill 70 and was buried in a mass grave. The commenter adds that Rogers may simply have been grinning in disbelief that he was still alive, but he's not 100% sure that he's found the right man. In August of 1945, people around the world celebrated in the streets as World War II came to an end. In America, the now famous photo of a soldier kissing a nurse or a dental assistant has become synonymous with the spontaneous jubilation. But Australia has its very own iconic but somewhat mysterious image. The photo is actually a still from the newsreel filmed on August 15, 1945 in Sydney, Australia. Civilians and soldiers gathered in the streets to celebrate. Shredded paper covers the floor after being thrown like confetti, and in the foreground of the image is a sharply dressed man holding his hat in his hand, standing on one leg. It became an icon of the celebration. The only question was who the man really was. More than it was Earn's name that appeared in releases about a commemorative coin minted in 2005. The $1 coin shows an image of the dancing man, and though it does not bear a name itself, the mint issued an information pocket about the coin, which identified the dancer as Earn Hill. This upset the other claimants, particularly the family of Frank McAllery. Frank was a barrister who was studying at the law school building on the street. When he heard the news, he and the others studying that day went out to celebrate. Frank claims that the dancing was spontaneous, and he became embarrassed when he realized his boss would likely see it and be unhappy, which is why he ran into the crowd. A number of now former barristers and even a judge have attested that Frank is the dancing man. Others have said it's better no one person is the dancing man, as he better represents all of Australia's jubilation. The Babushka lady is probably one of the most famous unidentified people in history. Countless conspiracy theories surround her and what she may or may not have done on November 22, 1963. The Babushka lady was a woman who appeared in many still pictures and video footage of President John F. Kennedy's motorcade in Dallas, Texas, shortly before and after he was assassinated. She appeared to be a relatively short older woman with a scarf covering her head, wearing a tan trench coat. She has quite a wide stance and is holding something up to her face, which many believe to be a camera. It was the scarf around her head, similar to that of a Russian grandmother, that earned her the nickname the Babushka lady. Early in the day, many of the women who were waiting to see the president had been wearing similar scarves as it had started to rain. But by 10 a.m., the rain had stopped, and everyone had removed the scarves by the time the motorcade came past at 12:30 p.m. Everyone except the Babushka lady. After the attack, while those around her dropped to the floor in shock or ran for cover, the woman stayed still and continued to survey the scene, still in her oddly wide stance. As the FBI launched their investigation into the incident, they called for anyone with footage to come forward. The Babushka lady would have had the perfect view of the scene, and from an angle that nobody else had captured. Given the controversy about where exactly the bullet had come from, her footage would have been valuable, but nobody came forward. That was until 1970, when a woman named Beverly Oliver told a conspiracy researcher that she was the Babushka lady. She said she'd been approached by two men claiming to be FBI agents after the incident. They asked for her camera, saying that they would return it within 10 days, but she never saw the camera or the agents again. In later retellings, she also claimed to know Jack Ruby, who introduced her to Lee Harvey Oswald, who was supposedly a member of the CIA. Her story was widely dismissed given the fact that she'd been a tall, skinny young woman in 1963 and didn't fit the Babushka lady's build. The camera she said she used had also not been created at that point in time. Many suspect the Babushka lady was either a Russian spy or part of a government cover-up. There are theories that the camera she was holding was some kind of weapon, or that it captured images that went against the agreed-upon story that Oswald worked alone. Others have suggested she may have even been a man, given her stance. The theories are unlikely to ever be put to bed unless the Babushka lady comes forward with the images that she took that day. Three-mast schooner sailing vessel, built in 1854 for the Tucker family from Maine. It was built of white oak, and when completed, it measured 210 feet in length. The vessel was mainly used as a packet ship, transporting post office packages to and from London and New York. During one of these trips in 1880, while under the command of Captain Baker, the Ellen Austin happened upon another schooner north of the Sargasso Sea. It seemed to be sailing listlessly, on no particular defined path, prompting the captain to take a closer look. He ordered his crew to follow the ship for the next 2 days, fearing that it may be a trap set up to catch them unaware. They kept a close eye on the ship, but for the next 2 days, they saw no movement or any sign of activity. Feeling confident that it was indeed safe to board, Captain Baker then ordered 4 of his crewmen to row closer to the ship, and they boarded cautiously with their weapons drawn. Upon inspection of the ship, it seemed to be in good condition with its rigging intact, no sign of a struggle, and its mahogany shipment was still aboard, and surprisingly, there was no sign of the crew. They found that the only missing items were the ship's log and the nameplate which had been removed from the bow. Although they found it strange that the ship was adrift, they decided that it would be an excellent salvaging opportunity, and the captain ordered a few select men to take control of it and follow him to New York. For the next few days, all went well until they encountered a violent storm, which separated the two ships. 2 days later, the storm lifted and the sea returned to calm, but the derelict ship was nowhere to be seen. Sometime later, the ship was spotted once more, sailing as it had when they'd come upon it the first time, without course and seemingly adrift. Baker changed course and intercepted the ship once again, only to find that his crew had now also gone missing. The crew thought it best to leave the ship adrift, but Baker decided to send yet more men aboard for the salvage. As they readied the ship to sail, a thick fog settled on the water, reducing visibility to only a few feet, and again they lost contact. The Ellen Austin was forced to a standstill, and when the fog eventually lifted, the derelict ship had disappeared along with Baker's crew. Baker sailed on to New York, but the mysterious schooner and the men on board were never seen again. By January 28, 1948, the BSAA Star Tiger passenger aircraft had made 11 transatlantic flights and had spent a total of 575 hours in the sky. On that morning, it was carrying 25 passengers and 6 crew members on a flight from Lisbon to Bermuda, with a refueling stopover to be carried out in Santa Maria. After boarding, Captain Brian McMillan reported that the plane's inner engine needed attention, and the flight was delayed for 2.5 hours. After the repairs were done, they took off successfully and traveled to Santa Maria for the stopover. However, before they could resume their flight, reports of bad weather caused McMillan to become concerned, and he decided that they should stay in Santa Maria until the next morning. The following day, despite high winds, the plane took off for its last leg to Bermuda. McMillan decided to fly below 2,000 feet, as this would help him to avoid most of the strong winds. Another plane took off an hour earlier, and the pilot had agreed to radio weather information back to McMillan. But soon after takeoff, Star Tiger flew into heavy rains, causing it to be blown off course. But the plane's navigator, Cyril Ellison, adjusted and gave McMillan a new course, which caused them to fly directly into a gale.
This did not concern McMillan, however, as he was confident that they would still reach Bermuda with at least an hour's worth of fuel left, and they would land at about 5 a.m. At 3:15 a.m., Star Tiger's radio officer, Robert Tuck, received a bearing from the Bermuda operator, and Tuck confirmed its receipt 2 minutes later. At 3:50, the operator tried to contact the plane again, but received no response. He tried twice more at 4:05 and 14:40, but to no avail, and although many receiving stations were listening to Star Tiger's frequency, no distress messages were ever received. Despite a search lasting 5 days, the plane was never found, and an investigation launched by the British Aviation Ministry stated, quote, "In closing this report, it may truly be said that no more baffling problem has ever been presented for investigation." The USS Pickering, named after the third U.S. Secretary of State, Timothy Pickering, was a top-sailed schooner designed for the U.S. Revenue Cutter Service in 1798. During the quasi-war with France, it was loaned to the U.S. Navy, and it was used during successful campaigns in the Greater Antilles. From 1799 to 1800, she made up part of Commodore Barry's squadron, which served in the West Indies and eventually permanently transferred to the U.S. Navy under command of Master Benjamin Hiller. During this time, the ship was involved with a battle against a French privateer and came under heavy fire. The USS Pickering was not only heavily outgunned, but only had 70 crew aboard, as opposed to the French crew of 250 men. A ferocious battle ensued, and against all odds, after a battle which lasted 9 hours, the French ship was forced to surrender. Following the battle, the USS Pickering captured 4 more French privateers and recovered an American merchant ship called Portland. On the 20th of August, 1800, the ship was ordered to join Commodore Thomas Truxton's squadron on the Guadalupe station in the West Indies and set sail from Newcastle, Delaware. But the ship never arrived in the West Indies, and it was never seen again. It was presumed at the time that the ship had been sunk due to a gale in September while en route to Truxton's squadron, but this has never been proven as the ship's crew has also never been found. Another ship, the USS Insurgent, went missing at the same time, and it's thought that the same storm was responsible for its disappearance. But it remains a mystery that may never be solved. On the 28th of December, 1948, a Douglas DST airliner was due to arrive in Miami at 4:03 a.m. The plane was being captained by Robert Linkist, co-piloted by Ernest Hill, and they were assisted by stewardess Mary Burke with 29 passengers aboard. The crew had arrived in San Juan at 7:40 p.m. the previous evening, and Linkist had reported to local crew repairmen that the landing gear warning light was malfunctioning. He also reported that the plane's battery was low on water and had discharged. He wasn't willing to delay the next scheduled takeoff to Miami, however, and decided that the batteries would be recharged by the plane's generators as they flew. He taxied to the end of the runway, but couldn't take off as there was no two-way radio communication due to the dead batteries. He was able to transmit, but not receive, and so he reported to the head of the Puerto Rican transport that he would fly to San Juan until the batteries were sufficiently charged. They eventually took off at 10:03 p.m. and circled the city for 11 minutes, after which they received confirmation from Civil Aeronautics Administration at San Juan that they could proceed to Miami. They left in good weather and clear skies, but subsequent calls from San Juan went unanswered. At 11:23 p.m., routine transmissions were received by the Overseas Foreign Air Traffic Control Center at Miami, when Linkist reported that they were at 8,300 feet and should be arriving at 4:04 a.m. Miami would receive more routine transmissions during the flight, and all seemed to be in order. At 4:13, Linkist reported once again saying that they were 50 miles south of Miami, though this transmission wasn't picked up by Miami, but rather by New Orleans, 600 miles away, who relayed the information to Miami. The weather in Miami was clear, and the plane was expected to land at any moment, but it never arrived. Nothing more was heard from Linkist or his fellow crew members, and the plane that they were traveling in, along with its passengers, has never been found. A similar plane to the DC-3 was found by divers in the Bermuda Triangle sometime later, but without any distinguishing features or registrations being found, it cannot be determined whether this was in fact the ill-fated flight that was bound for Miami. Christopher Columbus is known for the discovery of the quote New World, which he set out to find with a small fleet of 3 ships, named the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Columbus was aboard the Santa Maria on the 11th of October 1492, when he and his crew sailed across a 4-mile deep ravine in the Atlantic, now what we know today as the Bermuda Triangle. While searching for land, a crew member aboard Columbus's ship, Pedro, spotted a strange light in the distance, a sure sign that they were approaching land. However, as he continued to study the light, he noticed that it wasn't reflecting off the surface of the water, but was instead emanating up from the ocean. They continued to observe the light and started sailing towards it when they were shocked by an impossibly bright light that suddenly erupted in the sky. They described it in the ship's log as a light brighter than anything they'd ever seen before, causing them to become frightened. But they weren't the only ones to observe this phenomenon. 2 other Spanish ships were also in the area and described the exact same sighting, reporting that they were also surprised and shocked by the sudden eruption of light. Columbus wrote in his log that the light appeared to be the same light from a flickering candle, moving up and down during the night. They would see the light 3 more times following the initial sighting, ruling out speculation that it was caused by meteors or a comet. They also concluded that it could not have been caused by a campfire, not only due to its brilliance, but because land would have been beyond the horizon from the Spanish ship's perspective. The log also contains further entries of strange events that occurred as they sailed on. On the 11th of September, they encountered a mast floating in the water from a ship they estimated to have been at least 120 tons in weight, stating that it was so large they were unable to retrieve it for closer examination. On the 20th of September, an entry in the log describes an event where the crew saw multiple bright lights in the sky that seemed to move in relation to the stars above them. 5 hours later, Columbus and his crew would make history discovering the New World. In 1968, Donald Crowhurst of Tynemouth, Devon, England, picked up the Sunday Times newspaper. As he was flicking through, he saw an article about a round-the-world race that the newspaper was sponsoring. As he read the article, Crowhurst saw that the prize for winning the race was $5,000, which, adjusted for inflation, is about $75,000 in 2021, and was considered a large sum of money back then. Despite having very little sailing experience, Crowhurst was an electrical engineer and believed that what it took to build a boat, sail around the world, and believed that he had what it took to build a boat, sail it around the world, and win the prize money. Crowhurst got to work and very early on realized that he was not as well equipped as he had first thought. During the construction of the Tynemouth Electron, Crowhurst ran into structural issues and had to push back his launch date, leaving him at a disadvantage. The ship's construction had been crowdfunded by the town of Tynemouth, and residents watched on, waiting for their moment of glory. Behind the scenes, time was quickly running out. Crowhurst had until October 31st, 1968 to set sail from England, meaning that he had to launch his ship with many parts incomplete and without having tested the boat. As the final day approached, Crowhurst got into the Tynemouth Electron and set sail from Tynemouth Harbor. He just made the deadline for entry, but now had to play catch-up as the other competitors had set off weeks earlier. Crowhurst didn't let this get in his way, and he sailed from England and into the Atlantic Ocean. He found himself sailing through the Bermuda Triangle in June of 1969, and this is where things took a turn for the worse. On June 24th, Crowhurst began writing a captain's log that turned out to be a 25,000-word manifesto. a combination of bizarre ramblings and semi-lucid thoughts. Months at sea had sent Crowhurst mad. He was dealing with constant problems on his ship and was under significant stress. Many pleaded with him to give up and return home after hearing the damage his boat had sustained. However, Crowhurst was too embarrassed to admit defeat and pushed on. His last log entry was on June 24, 1969, where he wrote, quote, "It has been a good game that must be ended at the... I will play this game. When I choose, I will resign the game. There is no reason to be harmful." Last radio contact was made with him on June 29th, and since then, he's never been seen or heard from again. It wouldn't be until July 10th that the Tynemouth Electron was found floating in the Bermuda Triangle, close to where the infamous Mary Celeste was found decades before. When the boat was discovered, it was completely abandoned apart from the captain's logs, maps, and other documents. Donald Crowhurst has never been seen or heard from again after mysteriously vanishing in the Bermuda Triangle. On January 17, 1949, the Star Aeriel of the British South American Airways was preparing for another day of commercial flights at the Kindley Field in Bermuda. The BSAA had been set up during World War II to create trade routes and to help bring soldiers to the battlefronts from countries in South America. After the war had ended, the company began using its planes for trading and passenger trips, and found that this venture was quite successful. The Star Aeriel was called into action after one of the BSAA's other planes, the two-door GANKH Star Lion, suffered mechanical and engine failures and was unable to make the scheduled flight. The 13 passengers and 7 crew were transferred from the Star Lion to the Star Aeriel, and the pilot and crew prepared for takeoff. The passengers were headed for Kingston, Jamaica, where they chatted with each other, sharing their excitement to be headed to Kingston. About an hour into the flight, the captain made radio contact with Kingston Airport. He said, quote, "I departed from Kindley Field at 8:41 a.m. My ETA is 2:10 p.m. I'm flying in good visibility at 18,000 feet. I flew over 150 miles south of Kindley Field at 9:32 hours. My ETA at 30 degrees north is 9:37 hours. Will you accept control?" At 9:42 a.m., the last radio contact was made with the Star Aeriel, and the captain announcing that he would be changing radio frequencies. This was the last time anyone heard from the crew of the Star Aeriel. It wasn't until the plane failed to land at the airport that the alarm was raised, and by 4 p.m., search crews had flown out to find it. Those on the ground intersected the path that the Star Aeriel had taken and used timings to calculate the approximate location at 9:42 a.m. when the radio contact was lost. Using these calculations, they were able to deduce that the Star Aeriel's last known location was in the Bermuda Triangle. Things were looking bleak for the passengers and crew of the Star Aeriel as hours passed with no sign of the aircraft, and everyone began to panic. Despite days of rigorous searches, the Star Aeriel and the 20 souls on board were never found. An inquest was held. However, without finding any wreckage, little conclusions could be made. The Star Aeriel has become yet another tragedy to befall the Bermuda Triangle. Irving Rivers was an experienced and established pilot. So on November 3, 1978, Rivers nor anyone who knew him were overly concerned about his flight that would take him over the Bermuda Triangle. Rivers, who was piloting a Piper Navajo for the Eastern Caribbean Airways, took off from the US Virgin Islands headed for St. Thomas. As Rivers took off, there were no immediate concerns about the integrity of the plane he was piloting, and everything seemed to be in good order. As he ascended, air traffic control radioed into Rivers to let him know that a small rain cloud was headed his way, and that he should try to avoid it. Aside from the small patch of rain, accounts from that day note that it was warm with good visibility. The flight went without incident, and Rivers did not report any unusual activity or any concerns.
Rivers was due to land at St. Thomas to pick up passengers and then take them to a different destination. However, that didn't happen, and Rivers never arrived at St. Thomas. Air traffic control crew at the St. Thomas airport reported seeing Rivers' plane, recalling that they specifically could see the red and green lights flashing. As River was descending, another plane took off from the runway, blocking the view of Rivers' plane. According to the air traffic controller, after this, he could no longer see Rivers' plane. The red and green flashing lights had vanished and the plane had disappeared from the radar. Within minutes, an emergency search crew was assembled and quickly mobilized to find Rivers and the missing Piper Navajo. What they struggled to understand was how Rivers could have disappeared within seconds. He was only 1 mile from the landing strip and vanished into thin air. Despite search efforts, neither Rivers nor the Piper Navajo has ever been found. The USS Cyclops was the biggest ship in the US Navy's history in 1918. Being 550 feet long, it wasn't exactly easy to lose. However, that is exactly what happened in the midst of World War I, and 103 years later, we're still left with the question of what happened to the USS Cyclops. The USS Cyclops had been in commission since 1910, with the US Navy proudly showing off their incredibly large ship to the rest of the world. However, in 1918, at the onset of World War I, the ship and its crew were given a different mission. Their new mission was to transport manganese ore, which is used in steelmaking and needed to help the war effort. In March of 1918, the USS Cyclops was loaded with 11,000 tons of manganese ore and set sail from Brazil, headed first to Barbados for refueling, and after Barbados, they would land on home soil in Baltimore, USA. The USS Cyclops left without incident, and the weather was said to be good. However, 9 days into their trip, as they were passing the Bermuda Triangle, they disappeared mysteriously. There was no radio communication, no letters, and no warning that something aboard had gone wrong. Naval investigators were left stunned. How could the biggest ship in the world just mysteriously vanish without a trace? The US Navy made a statement about the USS Cyclops saying, quote, "The disappearance of this ship has been one of the most baffling mysteries in Navy history. All attempts to locate her have proved unsuccessful." Dan Barak was well known around Miami, Florida. He owned a hotel and was known to be a jet setter living a luxurious lifestyle. With his money, Barak bought a 23-foot luxury cabin cruiser and parked it at the Miami Marina to enjoy whenever he wanted. On December 22nd, 1967, he wanted to do something special to celebrate the upcoming holiday season. So he called up his friend, Father Patrick Horgan, and invited him out to his brand new luxury boat titled the Witchcraft. Barak wanted to take Horgan out to sea so they could see the Christmas lights and the bustling city of Miami from afar while relaxing and spending some quality time together. The pair left the Miami Marina sometime in the evening before 9 p.m. and sailed out to buoy number 7 that was less than a mile from the marina. All of a sudden, the Witchcraft hit something, causing it to stop working. Barak wasn't too worried as the ship was sold to him as being virtually unsinkable, and he had plenty of life jackets on board for himself and Horgan. Barak called the Coast Guard and asked them for a tow back to the marina. However, when they arrived 20 minutes later, Barak, Horgan, and the Witchcraft were nowhere to be seen. They were unable to make radio contact with the ship as the night went on. The Coast Guard searched over 1,200 square miles for the missing men, and as night turned into day, the anxiety and seriousness of the situation grew. After searching a total of 24,500 square miles, there was no sign of the Witchcraft, nor its 2 passengers. There has been no debris or wreckage from the Witchcraft, and experts are left with more questions than answers. Some believe that the Witchcraft was pulled into the Gulf Stream. However, the Coast Guard extensively searched this area and found nothing. The mysterious vanishing of the Witchcraft, Dan Barak and Patrick Horgan, is one of many to occur within the infamous Bermuda Triangle, leaving hundreds of families without answers and scientists baffled at the phenomenon. When people go missing abroad, it can be even harder than usual for families and friends to try to locate their missing loved ones. Different languages and customs can frustrate the search and searchers. In the case of Jesse Galganov, it added to the confusion in an already puzzling case. Jesse disappeared while on a hiking trip in Peru in 2017. He was 22 years old at the time and had graduated college a few months earlier. He was described as a bright young man and planned to go to medical school to become a doctor. But before that, he wanted to go on a gap year. Jesse was an experienced traveler and hiker and looked forward to seeing new sights in South America and Asia. The first stop on his gap year was Peru. He arrived in Lima on September 24th and spent a couple of days seeing the sights in the city. He kept in touch with his friends and family back home, especially his mother in Canada. After a few days, Jesse took an 8-hour bus trip to Juarez further north. The city sits just outside the Huascarán National Park. The Peruvian Andes overlook the city, and it's a popular spot for tourists. Jesse arrived in Juarez on the morning of September 28, 2017, and set about getting to his hostel, Kame House. He was captured on CCTV walking towards the hostel and arrived at 6:40 a.m. He spent the day in Juarez gathering supplies and visiting various supermarkets. He also talked with people at the hostel and his friends back home. The people he met at the hostel said he was excited about his travels and was in good spirits. Jesse spent the day at the hostel, then set out early the following morning for the Santa Cruz Trail. He told his mother it would be about a 4-day hike, and he wouldn't have reception during that time. He didn't want her to worry and said he would be back in touch on October 2nd. He would need to be back in civilization by then because he had a return bus ticket for that day. Jesse was on a budget and wouldn't want to waste money on a ticket for a trip that he wasn't certain he would take. October 2nd came and went, and Jesse's mother didn't hear from him. After a few more days, she got very worried and started to reach out to his friends. They hadn't heard from him either. It didn't seem unbelievable that Jesse might change his plans and take a longer hiking route, but his friends thought it was strange that he would let his mother worry. Jesse's mother contacted authorities in Peru, Canada, and the US, as Jesse was a dual citizen, and started the investigation into his disappearance. At first, it wasn't clear if Jesse made it to the trail at all or even to the hostel. The hostel owner first said that he had, but then denied it. In the end, Snapchat messages from the hostel, as well as the CCTV footage, proved he had been there. The trail was harder to prove. According to the Park Service that administered the trail, there was no one registered on the trail that day that Jesse went hiking. He hadn't paid the registration fee at the trailhead, but that didn't necessarily mean that he hadn't gone ahead with the hike. It could have been due to the fact that the people working weren't actual employees, and proper protocol might not have been followed. This confusion caused some delay in the investigation, as Jesse's family considered the possibility that he might have been attacked on his way to the trailhead. A privately hired search team eventually found evidence that Jesse had made it onto the trail. 2 French tourists had seen Jesse on October 1st. The day before, he had arrived at the Talipampa camp, where they were staying late. He told them that he was late because he'd gotten disoriented and was suffering from headaches. It seemed as if he had altitude sickness. The next day, he was again in good spirits and left early after breakfast. The final sighting of Jesse was at 3:30 p.m. on October 1st, when he was asked by a group of Czech hikers for some water near Punta Union Pass. Jesse was definitely on the trail and seemed close to finishing it. It was either on the final day of the trip or on the afternoon of the penultimate day that something went wrong. If Jesse did run into trouble on the trail, his body has never been found. Neither have any of his belongings, which were brightly colored. The trail isn't for novices, but it was well trafficked, and if Jesse were somewhere nearby, it's likely that someone would have found him. It's possible, though, that he got disoriented and might have wandered off the trail and gotten lost in the jungle. Foul play is also a possibility. Some believe Jesse might have been attacked and robbed while on his hike, and that his body was purposefully hidden. Jesse is described as being 5'10" and weighing 170 pounds. He had brown hair and brown eyes,
was wearing black clothing and carrying a hiking pack that had a Canadian flag patch on one side. His bag contained a one-person tent, camping mattress, and other camping essentials. Anyone with information is asked to contact helpusfindjesse@gmail.com. A case of mistaken identity ended in tragedy when masked criminals took the life of 20-year-old Adam Chadwick 15 years ago. Despite CCTV evidence and multiple leads by Adam's family, the case has never been solved. It was June 24, 2008. Adam was visiting his sister, Gemma, in Leeds, England, when the attack happened. It was a few days after his daughter's 3rd birthday, and Adam was in good spirits. Gemma and her fiancé were preparing for their wedding, and Adam was close with his future brother-in-law, and Gemma's fiancé had planned at some point to ask Adam to be his best man. The typical family visit was interrupted at 9:40 p.m. by a knock at the door. The visitor was a woman that none of them recognized. The woman asked for someone named Michelle, but there was nobody of that name at that address. The woman was told that they didn't know who she was talking about, and she left. As Adam and his family continued the evening, the woman went to other houses on the street asking after Michelle. Nobody knew who she was talking about. An hour after the first visit, there was another knock at the door. The woman was back, but this time she wasn't alone. There were also 3 men wearing masks and camouflage military-style clothing. They again asked for Michelle, and Gemma's fiancé tried to explain again that they didn't know who Michelle was. But the men tried to push their way in anyway. Adam managed to get the door shut, but the men forced their way in, demanding to know where Michelle was. One of the intruders was carrying a weapon and fired twice. One bullet hit Adam. After this, the intruders fled, leaving Adam's family confused and in shock. Adam was rushed to the hospital, but he passed away a few days later. At first, Adam's family believed it would be a few months at most before the crime was solved. It was such a devastating attack and seemed impossible that the person responsible would be able to hide for long. Adam had been well liked, and it was hard to imagine that anyone would want to protect the people who had done this. But this wouldn't be the case. There were some clues early in the investigation. The criminals had fled the scene of the crime in a blue Ford C-Max with registration plate YH54SBV. The car was found dumped not far from the scene, and someone had tried to start a fire to destroy evidence. The rear tire on the driver's side had been replaced with a vehicle spare. The same car had been stolen a few weeks earlier in an area of Leeds called Little London. This theft was also caught on camera. Where it was stored between this point and the crime is a mystery, but on June 20th at 11:30 p.m., it was caught on CCTV at the BP garage on Roundhay Road, Chapeltown. At this point, all the normal tires were on the car. The driver filled the rear driver's side tire with air and left. It seemed like that tire had a puncture, and the criminals decided instead to just replace it. A final piece of CCTV footage was released in this case. This showed the woman running from the scene of the crime. Unfortunately, the camera was too far away, and the scene was too dark to be able to make out much from this image. But because she had been to other houses in the area, it was possible for police to build a composite sketch of this mysterious woman. She was described as looking as if she was in her late 20s, between 27 and 28 years old. The woman was roughly 5 foot 5 inches tall and very thin. She had olive skin and dark brown hair and prominent cheekbones. She was wearing a black fleece over a black round neck top. One of the many questions surrounding this mystery is how she related to the 3 masked men. She may have been afraid of them and forced to go as a decoy to these houses, or she may have been a willing participant in this scheme. It's also a mystery who Michelle is or was. The police believe Adam was attacked in a case of mistaken identity, so identifying who was supposed to be the target will help to solve the crime. Adam didn't have any enemies, but Michelle clearly did. If this individual knew who might want to attack them, that could help identify some suspects. As it is, the crime has never been linked to any other attacks, and Michelle has never come forward. There were some arrests early in the investigation, but these people were all released without charge. Since then, there have been many appeals for information and a reward for information, but the case remains cold. Anybody with information that could help solve the case is asked to contact the West Yorkshire Police on 101 or Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111. When it comes to thefts, especially art heists, there's always hope that CCTV footage will help the crime to be solved quickly. Normally that's the case, but not always. In 2013, a gallery manager was left shocked when two prized pieces of art were stolen from his gallery in London's Notting Hill. Despite CCTV footage capturing the theft in action, the case has never been solved. On Monday, the 9th of December, Nathan Engelbrad arrived at the small exhibitionist gallery to find the door to his gallery had been forced open with a crowbar. The reason why was immediately apparent. Two works of art worth thousands of dollars that had been hanging in the front room had disappeared. The stolen pieces of art were dot paintings, created by famous artist Damien Hirst. Both pieces were relatively simple works, with dots of random colors in neat rows on a white background. But they were both very expensive and signed by the artist. Combined, they came to around £33,000. The theft was devastating. Not only had the gallery lost two paintings, but they were paintings the gallery had only had for a few days. Nathan Engelbrad later revealed to the press that he'd only received the paintings days earlier. The paintings had only been in his possession for 4 days, and he was planning to unveil them to clients the day after the theft took place. The thief clearly knew what they were doing, which became even more apparent when the police checked CCTV footage from the scene of the crime. The footage showed an individual male parked outside the gallery just after 3:30 a.m. He climbed out of the dark-colored hatchback vehicle and forced the door open. The thief went straight for the two targeted paintings, putting them in the back of his car before leaving. The vehicle went off in the direction of the Ladbroke Grove tube station. The whole incident took about a minute. All the while, across the road, a driver was making a delivery at a restaurant and never realized anything out of the ordinary was happening. The two Hearst pieces were far from the only expensive works of art in the gallery. There were other Hearst paintings and expensive pieces of work elsewhere. One was even hung directly next to one of the paintings that were stolen, but the rest of the gallery was untouched. The police believes that the paintings were stolen to order. The person had stolen two specific pieces that were requested. These could have been selected as they would be easier to sell due to the style. The thief was likely professional and seemed to know exactly what they were doing. The thief was covered from head to toe, including goggles that obscure his eyes. The timing of the theft was also interesting. This area in Notting Hill is filled with bars and restaurants, but given the time on a Monday morning, it's unlikely that there would have been many people around to see the crime. Still, the police pointed out that the paintings would have been clearly visible in the car, and hoped that someone might have seen something. Also, the gallery was typically closed on Mondays, so it was possible that there would have been more time between the crime and it being discovered than if the theft had taken place on a Tuesday morning. The theft and CCTV footage appeared in newspapers around the world, but there was never any follow-up, and the case doesn't appear to have been solved. Rita Sloff Montero was last seen on CCTV from a bus on February 17, 2006. She was 18 years old and trying to get to a study visit with her friends but had missed the bus. She never arrived at her intended destination but didn't return home either. What happened to her remains a mystery. Rita was a popular and outgoing young woman, but she'd been struggling to maintain her friendships over the past couple of years. In 2004, she'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia, which made her withdraw a little and caused her to suffer from bouts of depression. She would sometimes skip classes and drop out of meetings with friends. Despite her problems, she was looking forward to attending art classes after graduating. She had always enjoyed drawing and painting and wanted to continue this into adulthood. Given her plans, the study trip to a museum would have been extremely interesting to her. The location is home to a contemporary art museum and is the second most visited museum in Portugal. Rita had arranged to take part in the study trip with a group of friends. The plan had been to meet at a market where they would take a bus to the museum. Rita's mother dropped her off at 9 a.m., but her friends had not yet arrived. Rita waited for them for a while before going to a cafe that was directly opposite the bus stop. She used the bathroom and then called her friends to ask when they would be arriving. They said they were on their way and would be there soon. According to staff at the cafe, Rita left immediately after this. But when her friends arrived at the bus stop a few minutes later, she was nowhere to be seen. At about 9:15 a.m., the bus arrived. It wasn't unusual for Rita to change her mind about plans, and her friends believed that was exactly what had happened here. They boarded the bus and went on the study trip. By about 9:25 a.m., Rita was at the bus stop. CCTV from a passing bus caught an image of Rita talking to an unidentified woman. It's believed she was asking about bus times or if there was another way to get to her destination. It would have been about an hour's walk, and it appeared that the next bus to that destination wouldn't be for a while. There was also a young man at the bus stop at the time, and he was pacing back and forth. A few minutes later, another bus came. Rita got on the bus and asked the driver if it was going to the museum. It wasn't, so she got off the bus, and this was the last time anybody saw Rita. When she didn't return home that evening, her mother began to worry. It was even more worrying when she found out that Rita had never arrived at the museum, and none of her friends knew where she was. Rita's family tried to report her missing, but ran into problems due to how short of a time she'd been missing. When her father asked the police to try to trace her phone, he was told they would need a court order, and the courts were closed at that point. Rita was legally an adult, but her mental health condition meant she was considered vulnerable. This didn't add to the urgency in the case from police, though. When Rita's phone was eventually traced, the police discovered that it had been on until 4 p.m. on February 19th, more than 48 hours after she was last seen. It connected to multiple different cell towers, indicating that Rita, or at least her phone, had traveled a lot over those 2 days. The last place it pinged was about 7 miles north of where she had gone missing. After that, it was turned off or the battery ran out. By this point, Rita's family were very concerned. She had nothing with her other than her phone and her debit card, which was not used until after she went missing. She didn't have the medication that she needed to take daily, which only meant that she was even more vulnerable. Despite this, there still wasn't much urgency from the police. Rita's family hired a private investigator, but that didn't result in any new leads. Years later, Rita's father would win a lawsuit against local authorities due to their handling of the case. That didn't undo the damage caused by the delay in the investigation, though. Theories in this case range from Rita having a mental health crisis and ending up in the water, meeting foul play, or possibly even running away. There's one theory that she traveled to the Netherlands, where her maternal grandparents lived, but there's no evidence for this. Rita is described as 152 centimeters tall, with brown hair and brown eyes. She also had a lip piercing. Anyone with information in this case can contact 225-582-000. On June 18, 2012, 3 crimes took place in the area around Pyroa, New Zealand. 2 of those were attempted robberies at shops. The third, in Pyroa itself, was a senseless crime that took the life of a well-loved pizzeria owner. More than 10 years later, the person responsible for taking Jordan Vaturis' life remains a mystery. Jordan Vaturis was a popular member of the Pyroa community. He had moved to the town a few years earlier. Born in Greece, Jordan had had a tough start to life, but was determined and hardworking. And he made a good life for himself. He came to New Zealand after serving in the military and settled down there. Jordan married a woman named Gwendolyn and had 3 children. Even when he divorced Gwendolyn, they remained on good terms, and she would often come with the children to Pyroa to visit. In Pyroa, Jordan set up a pizzeria. He was described as going the extra mile to help people, and was generally well-liked. Most people in the community knew him as the Pizza Man. He had no known enemies, no disgruntled customers. The closest anybody came to that was an employee who had left his job shortly before the incident. They had argued at one point, but that was it. The day before the crime occurred had been like any other. Jordan's store, Mykonos, had been open as usual. Inside, as well as the typical takeaway counter, was a wall of caps Jordan had collected over the years. Sitting behind the counter was a police cap, one which had only recently been gifted to Jordan. He hadn't gotten around to hanging it up yet. The store closed at 10 p.m. and the employees went home. Jordan lived above the shop. He stayed on his computer until about 1:30 the following morning, then presumably turned in for the night. Hours later, the owner of the antique store, which was located next door, arrived to open the shop. He found Jordan's body at the gate that led from a gravel driveway to the back of Jordan's shop. His arm was caught in the mechanism, but the cause of his passing was a bullet wound. The investigation began immediately. Jordan had been attacked at the back of his shop and had stumbled 15 meters towards the gate before collapsing. Inside the shop, nothing seemed wrong. The front was all locked up and nothing had been stolen. A few months before this incident, meat from the restaurant had been stolen, but that was all there and accounted for. Even the money in Jordan's pocket and his expensive watch were still on his person. For years, the police kept details of the crime closely guarded while they looked for more clues and witnesses. The crime was believed to have taken place sometime between 1:30 and 4:30. During that time, many people had walked up and down the street or driven past, and it was hoped that someone might have seen something out of the ordinary. The police also believed there could have been a connection between this and two other robberies that took place earlier in the night. It could have been a robbery gone wrong, and the criminals decided against getting anything when they realized what they had done. As well as the connection to the robberies, the police explored the possibility that the crime might have been committed by someone Jordan knew. After the past meat robbery, one of Jordan's neighbors warned him to lock the gate at the back of the yard. It's not clear if he followed that advice, but if he did, then he may have gone to the gate to unlock it for someone. That leads to more questions about potential motives, as nobody knew anyone who might have a reason to hurt Jordan. Hundreds of people were interviewed, and many more tips came in, especially after a reward for information was offered. But all the leads led to dead ends. In 2020, during an episode of the TV show Cold Case, a little more information was revealed. The first was the exact type of weapon used to take Jordan's life. It was a .22 caliber weapon, and both the bullet and casing were found at the scene. That means that the police would have been able to test any weapon they came across and know for certain whether it was the one used in the crime. According to the police, thousands were tested, but none were the right weapon. The police also revealed that the attack happened at close range, and Jordan may have been trying to wrestle the weapon away when he was struck. Another potential clue in the case is two plastic ties found at the scene. One was in a loop, and the other straight. These might have been innocently dropped by someone earlier in the day, but the police believe they could have been dropped by the criminal. If that's the case, it could indicate that the criminal intended to tie Jordan up. The final clue was two CCTV images from the night in question. A suspicious four-wheel drive vehicle was seen circling the area. It was captured on camera at 1:09 a.m. and 1:21 a.m. It's possible the vehicle had something to do with the incident, or the occupant may have seen whoever was responsible. The police have kept other evidence, including the clothes Jordan wore during the attack. They hope that future DNA technology might help them catch the criminal. In the meantime, it's likely someone in the community knows what happened that night, and they just hope one day that person will finally come forward. Anyone with information can contact the police's cold case team at 0800-2653-2273 or Crime Stoppers at 0800-555-111. Having a child go missing has to be one of the worst experiences a parent can go through, especially if the case remains unsolved and they're never found. An even worse experience, though, is when they go missing and are later found deceased. And although this brings some sense of closure, it does nothing to quell the sense of loss that is felt. This is what the family of 19-year-old Kenneka Jenkins is going through after she mysteriously disappeared during a night out in September of 2018. And although the case has now been closed, they still have many questions that remain unanswered. Kenneka is described by her family as bright with a beautiful smile. She was close with her family, especially her mother, Teresa Martin, who was diagnosed with breast cancer, for which she underwent surgery in 2017. On the 8th of September 2018, Kenneka received some good news when she learned that she had landed a job at a nursing home in her hometown of Chicago. She told her mother that she and 3 of her friends were going out that night to celebrate, stating that they would be seeing a movie and going bowling. The last time that Teresa saw her daughter was as she left the house at around 11 p.m. that night. She had borrowed Teresa's car, but wasn't really heading to the cinema or a bowling alley. Instead, she drove to the Crown Plaza Hotel, where her friends were waiting for her. The group of friends arrived at the hotel at around 1 p.m., as is evidenced by CCTV footage that shows them entering the building via one of the side entrances. What followed was a night of dancing, drinking, and socializing, most of which was captured on cell phones as they shared their night out live on Facebook and Snapchat. While they were having a good time, it became clear in some of the videos that the women were receiving some unwanted attention from some of the men at the party. They were told to back off on multiple occasions, but this didn't deter the men from openly flirting. Kenneka's sister stated that she received a text from her at around 1:30, and although it isn't known what was said in the text, this is the last time that anyone heard from her, and soon the night would take a tragic turn. A Facebook Live video shows the group of women partying in a hotel room, thought to be on the hotel's 9th floor, and in the footage, a woman is talking directly to the camera. But in the reflection of her mirrored sunglasses, Kenneka can be seen sitting on the far side of the room. About half an hour later, Kenneka posted a video of her own to Snapchat, in which she's seen standing in one of the hotel's bathrooms. Following this, she returned to the party, but the group decided they'd had enough and left the room at around 3 a.m. The group exited the room, but as they did so, Kenneka realized that she'd left her phone and car keys behind. There are conflicting accounts about what happened next, as some people say her friends went back into the room to retrieve her possessions, leaving her waiting in the hallway, while others claim that she was waiting in the hotel's lobby. Whatever the case may be, when Kenneka's friends returned, she was nowhere to be found, and they immediately started to worry since she was heavily intoxicated. Strangely, the group of friends took nearly 20 minutes before they returned, and it isn't known why they decided to leave Kenneka waiting by herself. As soon as they realized that she was missing, the three friends started searching the hotel but had no luck finding her. With no other option, they decided to call Teresa at around 4 a.m. to ask whether she had arrived at the house, since they may have decided to go home alone. But Teresa informed them that she hadn't seen her daughter, and so the friends drove to her house, picked Teresa up, and brought her back to the hotel to look for Kenneka. Teresa was immediately doubtful of the friends' version of events, since it was obvious that they had been drinking, and she believed they were under the influence of illegal substances. They then informed her that Kenneka had also been drinking, but claimed that she had only had one drink all night. Teresa knew that even one drink could cause her to become intoxicated, since she wasn't used to drinking alcohol, and her fears worsened that something had happened to her. The next logical step would be to look through the hotel's security footage, as it would be simple enough to track anyone in the building, but for some reason, hotel staff refused and told Teresa that she needed to file a missing person report first, and only then could a police officer look at the footage. Frustrated at the lack of cooperation, Teresa decided to call 911 at around 7:15 a.m., but she had no luck here either, as the dispatcher told her to go home and wait, suggesting that Kenneka was likely passed out in one of the hotel rooms, and that her friends were lying about her being missing. Kenneka never returned home, and the next day, her family was finally able to file a missing person report. Investigators arrived at the hotel, and they were informed by the hotel staff that they had already looked through the CCTV security footage, and that Kenneka was nowhere to be seen. A search was immediately launched, and the rooms in the hotel were searched, as was the immediate area around the building, but no sign of Kenneka was found. Almost 9 hours later, at around 10 p.m., one of the officers decided to look through the security footage himself, and he quickly found footage of Kenneka as she stumbled through the hotel's halls. The timestamp on the footage showed that at 3:20 a.m., Kenneka was walking through the hotel, possibly looking for her friends or the exit, but she seemed disoriented and unsteady on her feet, clearly very intoxicated. The footage shows her walking out of an elevator on one of the lower floors, after which she walks back upstairs and stumbles down another hallway. She then accidentally walks into a men's bathroom before finding herself in the hotel's large kitchen where guests were not allowed, since it was under renovation at the time. She's then seen walking to the back of the kitchen and out of sight towards a walk-in freezer that was kept running as it was serving as an extra food storage area. At around 1 a.m., officers finally found Kenneka inside the freezer, where she had succumbed to hypothermia. She had been in the freezer for around 20 hours, and given that temperatures inside can drop to well below zero, she had been deceased for some time. She was found lying on the freezer's floor with one shoe missing, and officers described her as being completely frozen. It was determined that her passing was an accident, since she likely opened the freezer door and couldn't get out again after shutting it. The autopsy showed that she was indeed intoxicated, and that she had prescription medication in her system that she was not supposed to be taking. The case had seemingly been solved, but Teresa and other members of Kenneka's family believe there's more to the story than meets the eye. This sentiment has been echoed by many other people who were following the case, with some suggesting that her friends had a hand in her demise. Others have speculated that she was lured into the freezer by one of the hotel's staff members, who then locked the door behind her, or that staff members altered the security footage to omit the fact that she was being followed through the halls while she was looking for a way out. But most people believe that the footage tells the whole story, and that Kenneka had simply wandered into the freezer by accident. Teresa would later file a wrongful death lawsuit against the hotel, stating that if she had been allowed to review the security footage, they might have found Kenneka in time to save her life. The suit was eventually settled, but the terms of the settlement have never been made public. In some true crime cases, investigators try to find a motive for the crime, but in many instances there doesn't seem to be one. Sometimes this is because the criminal targeted the wrong person by mistake, or it might just be a crime of opportunity that didn't intentionally target one specific person. In the strange case involving Elizabeth Barraza, a 29-year-old woman from Tomball, Texas, investigators are struggling to make sense of her murder, since she didn't seem to have any enemies and was well liked by her community. To make matters even more frustrating, Elizabeth's attacker was caught on CCTV security cameras on multiple occasions while carrying out the attack, but they've still not been identified, and since there were no other witnesses, there's no telling whether it will ever be solved. The incident occurred on the 25th of January, 2019, when Elizabeth was getting ready to start a garage sale at her house at around 7 a.m. This wasn't the first time that she'd held a garage sale at her house, since she did so every year, but this time things would turn out very differently. Elizabeth's husband, Sergio, wasn't home at the time, since he'd left for work at around 6:48 a.m. He was working for a flooring company where he was employed as a carpet installer, and just minutes after he left, his wife would lose her life. CCTV footage from the area shows a dark-colored pickup truck driving towards Elizabeth's home, and eventually it's parked across the street, where the driver watched Elizabeth with the truck's engine still running. In the next piece of footage that was obtained from the incident, the driver of the truck can be seen approaching Elizabeth while she's standing in her driveway. They're wearing a loose-fitting jacket or robe, and it isn't clear whether they're male or female. For a few seconds, the two seem to have a conversation, and it almost seems as though they know each other, but just a few moments later, the unthinkable happens. The attacker takes something out of their jacket, and as soon as Elizabeth sees the item, she immediately takes a step back, as if she's frightened of whatever it is. We then learn that the item is a firearm, as the attacker takes aim and fires, ending Elizabeth's life on her own driveway. They then turn around and run back to their truck, fleeing the area as quickly as they can. Strangely, the truck can be seen returning to the house a few minutes later, as if the attacker wanted to make sure that Elizabeth hadn't gotten up, and this has led many people to believe that this was a contract killing. Unfortunately, the CCTV footage of the incident is rather grainy, since the camera was far away from Elizabeth's house, and it's impossible to identify the attacker. One of Elizabeth's neighbors, Candy Ellis, heard the firearm being discharged and immediately called 911. When the police arrived, they found that Elizabeth was still alive, and they very quickly arranged for her to be taken to Memorial Hermann Hospital, where doctors would do their best to save her life, but she passed away a few hours later. The crime would send shockwaves through the neighborhood, as no one could understand why Elizabeth would be targeted. She was a kind person who volunteered at the very same hospital where she passed away, and the fact that she was attacked in her own driveway made other residents in the area feel very uneasy, since there was no telling whether this was a random crime that could be repeated at any time. The Harris County Sheriff's Office launched an investigation into the attack, and they had a strong suspicion that Elizabeth knew her attacker. Hence, Sergio was interviewed first, followed by other residents that knew the couple. There was also a strong suspicion that the crime was carried out by more than one person. An investigator stated that they were certain that someone in the area had at least some knowledge of the perpetrator. The investigation was further hampered by the fact that no clues were left behind at the scene. There's also been speculation that Elizabeth's attacker handed her something before discharging their weapon, and many people believe this to be a note that's being kept from the public by investigators. When surveillance cameras in the area were checked, the vehicle was identified as possibly a Nissan Frontier Pro 4X. Some of Elizabeth's neighbors stated that this truck was driving around the neighborhood the previous night, and it's possible that the attacker was looking for the best spot from where to carry out their plan. Investigators believe that Elizabeth's killer is a woman, based on the attacker's size and gait as they approached her, but this has obviously not been confirmed and remains speculation for now. More CCTV footage would later be released, this time from Elizabeth and Sergio's own doorbell camera. And while the crime itself isn't captured, it did provide investigators with a small piece of audio in which Elizabeth can be heard greeting her attacker, saying good morning. This has led many people to believe that she didn't actually know her attacker, or that she didn't recognize them, spawning theories that the attacker was wearing some kind of disguise, probably a mask. At present, Elizabeth's case remains unsolved, and a $20,000 reward is being offered to anyone with information that leads to Elizabeth's attacker's arrest. If you have any information on this case, you're asked to get in touch with the Houston branch of Crime Stoppers. The case involving the disappearance of 31-year-old doctor Sneha Anne Phillips is one that's left many people scratching their heads, since she vanished on the same day that the 9/11 attacks were carried out, and it isn't known whether she was one of the people who lost their lives in one of the buildings, or if she disappeared via some other means. It's now been 22 years since she mysteriously vanished, and investigators are no closer to solving the mystery, since there are many conflicting accounts of Sneha's actions that day, as well as differing descriptions of the type of person that she was. The day before she disappeared, Sneha spoke to her mother via a messaging app for more than 2 hours, during which she recounted a night out that she'd recently had, and told her about the plans that she'd made for the upcoming week. It's also known that she spent time tending to her plants inside her apartment in Manhattan, specifically her orchids, and that later that afternoon, she was caught on security cameras inside a department store with another woman while she did some shopping. This is the only known footage of Sneha before she vanished. In still images of the footage, she can be seen browsing through racks of clothing, and she eventually ended up purchasing a dress, some lingerie, shoes, and linen for her bed. What happened to Sneha after this is one big mystery that's given rise to many theories, as she was never seen again. The problem with every one of these theories is that there's no evidence to back them up, and at best it remains mere speculation. Sneha's husband, Ron, stated that he arrived home from his shift at the Jacobi Hospital and realized that she wasn't there. But this wasn't unusual since she often stayed out without notifying him. When he woke up the next morning, she still hadn't come home, but even then he wasn't concerned as this wasn't unusual behavior. When he received news about the attack on the Twin Towers, though, he became very concerned and started contacting friends and family members, none of whom had heard from Sneha or had any idea where she may be. The leading theory in her disappearance is that Sneha also got word of the attack and rushed to the scene to help since she was a doctor, but she lost her life at the scene. Her family firmly believe this to be the case, and they consider her to be a selfless hero who lost her life while attempting to save lives. But not everyone is convinced that this is the case, since some of the details of her life before her disappearance have painted her in a different light, and not all of it is very flattering. It would come to light that Sneha had been having issues with alcohol use that resulted in her contract with the Cabrini Medical Center not being renewed. She had recently started a new job at St. Vincent's Medical Center in Staten Island, but she'd been suspended since she failed to attend sessions with a substance abuse counselor, and her life at home with Ron wasn't as idyllic as it seemed. The couple had been having issues related to Sneha staying out late all night without a word as to where she was or who she was spending time with. It's also been reported that she often brought women home after a night out, and on one occasion, she was caught in a compromising situation with one of these women by her brother, John. Investigators also stated that she and Ron had a heated argument outside of a courtroom after she pleaded not guilty to filing a false complaint against one of her coworkers. The argument ended with Sneha leaving abruptly, clearly fuming at whatever was said between her and her husband. But even these details are sketchy at best, as Sneha's family, including Ron, have now stated that these claims have been falsified and that she never struggled with illegal substances or alcohol abuse. Ron has also claimed that Sneha's nights out never caused a problem in their marriage since they weren't in the habit of living a conservative lifestyle. They've also claimed that many of these details were merely fabricated by investigators, though they haven't stated why they believe this would be done. At first, Sneha was added to a list of victims who lost their lives during the 9/11 attacks, but her name was then removed after details of her professional and personal life came to light. Added to this was the fact that there was no evidence that she was present at the Twin Towers that morning, and it's thought that she may have disappeared the night before. Sneha was officially declared deceased on the 10th of September 2004, since no evidence could be found that she was still alive. Her family was devastated at the news that her name had been removed from the 9/11 victims list, and decided to fight the ruling with her mother, stating that she finds it more peaceful to think that she lost her life while attempting to help others. They got their wish in 2008, when Sneha's name was returned to the victim list, with the judge stating that it was far more likely that she lost her life there than any of the other theories that had been put forward. Still, many alternate theories remain, and many people believe that Sneha didn't choose to disappear of her own accord, since her passport and bank cards were found in her apartment after the fact. Others think that her husband Ron had something to do with her strange disappearance, but investigators have questioned him thoroughly, and he's been ruled out as a suspect. He would also make concerted efforts to find her, even employing a private investigator, but to no avail. Some of the investigators involved in Sneha's case have stated that it's unlikely that her case will ever be solved, since there just isn't sufficient evidence to point them in the right direction, and any time spent on her case would be better spent on cases that are actually solvable. There is a theory that Sneha did in fact decide to disappear on her own, and that she used the 9/11 attacks as the perfect distraction to do so. Then there's the fact that she was seen in a department store with another woman the day before she disappeared. While investigators don't consider this woman to be a suspect, they believe she may have information that could be relevant to the case, but she's not been identified and has not come forward with any information. Currently, Sneha has officially been listed as a 9/11 victim, a fact that has brought her family a lot of comfort and closure. But since there's no solid proof that this is the case, many people still feel uneasy about this ruling. Efforts are currently being made to identify more victims of the attacks using DNA analysis, and it may just turn out that Sneha was indeed present that day. But until then, her disappearance remains a mystery, with more questions than answers. 18-year-old Kelsey Smith graduated from Shawnee Mission West High School in May of 2007, and at the time of her disappearance had been in a relationship with her boyfriend for 6 months. It was for this reason that she went to a Target store in her hometown of Overland, Kansas on the 2nd of June at around 7 p.m., since she wanted to buy him a gift to celebrate the occasion. And in surveillance footage from the store, she can be seen arriving and walking through the store's automatic double doors. After choosing the items that she wanted to buy, she made her way to one of the registers and can be seen paying before leaving, and this would be the last time that she was seen alive. What wasn't known at first was that this footage showed something far more sinister that would eventually bring her case to a close. Kelsey's mother, Missy, later told investigators that she spoke to her daughter on the phone while she was still inside the store, and at that point, everything seemed normal. She was expected to be home shortly, but when her family was unable to get a hold of her, they started to worry that she may have run into some kind of trouble. Kelsey was known to respond to text messages and phone calls very quickly, and when she didn't do so that night, alarm bells started ringing among her family members. They would eventually decide to report her as missing later that night, after they were still unable to get a hold of her. Witnesses described seeing Kelsey in the Target store's parking lot at around 7:07 p.m., but they were unable to say what happened to her after that. A search was quickly organized, but she was nowhere to be seen in the immediate area around the store. It wouldn't be until 4 hours later that her car was found across the street, where it had been left in a Macy's store parking lot. And when it was searched, investigators found her wallet, her purse, and the gift that she had bought for her boyfriend at the Target store inside. But her cell phone was missing, since she would have never left these items unattended intentionally. Investigators started to believe that she may have been abducted from the Target store parking lot, after being transported elsewhere by an unknown person. This prompted them to look at CCTV surveillance footage from the Target store parking lot, and what they discovered was chilling. Kelsey could be seen walking towards her car after exiting the store, but investigators noticed a flash that seemed to travel towards her car, and they quickly surmised that this was, in fact, a person running in her direction. They believed that this was likely the person responsible for her abduction, and so they decided to look at footage from inside the store. At first, nothing jumped out to them as unusual, but that's when they noticed that one particular man could be seen in every aisle that she was on. This man never came too close to Kelsey, and he never made any attempts to talk to her, but investigators noticed that he kept glancing over at her, as if he was keeping a close eye on her, and he didn't seem very interested in any of the items on the shelves. Cameras outside the store captured the man as he exited the store, and investigators released this image to the public in hopes that he would be identified, though there was no evidence that he was responsible for Kelsey's disappearance at this point. In the meantime, forensic investigators dusted Kelsey's car for fingerprints and found a set that didn't belong to her on one of the seatbelts. Efforts were also being made to obtain Kelsey's cell phone records, but this took a few days since her provider was reluctant to release this information. When they did eventually do so, it was found that Kelsey's phone pinged off a tower about 20 miles from the Target store in an area near Longview Lake in Grandview. This area was searched, and this is when her family's worst fears were confirmed, when she was found deceased in a wooded area. It was found that her life had been ended due to asphyxiation with her own belt, and that she had been assaulted. The investigation then started to pick up pace when a man contacted the police to say that he recognized the man in the security footage, stating that he believed it was his neighbor, 26-year-old Edwin Roy Hall. It's been speculated that Hall followed Kelsey through the store with the intention of abducting her, and after she left the store, he followed her into the parking lot. Here, he produced a firearm and forced her into her own vehicle before ordering her to drive to Longview Lake, where he ended her life. Hall was tracked down and taken into custody on the 6th of June. He was charged with first-degree murder and aggravated kidnapping, but he vehemently denied having anything to do with Kelsey's disappearance. He even went as far as offering to have his DNA and fingerprints taken to prove his innocence. But when he was confronted with the fingerprint evidence found in Kelsey's car, he knew that he'd been caught, and the following year, on the 23rd of July, he decided to plead guilty to both charges. It would also come to light that Hall had harassed another woman on a previous occasion. The woman, a waitress, told investigators that he had harassed her while she was serving him, and after finishing his meal, he fled without paying his bill. Knowing that he would be found guilty thanks to evidence against him, Hall decided to avoid the death penalty by pleading guilty, and he was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. Given the opportunity to speak after his sentence was handed down, Hall stated that he couldn't find the right words to say, and added that he was very sorry for what he had done. His lawyer also pointed to the fact that he had a very difficult childhood growing up, but this did little to change the public opinion of the murderer, who will not see the outside of a prison again. A 911 call can prove invaluable during a missing person investigation. But in the case of a mysterious disappearance of 30-year-old Kayla Louder from Utah in 2014, her 911 call has caused some confusion, as people believe it proves that her state of mind was far from normal. In the time leading up to her disappearance, Kayla was temporarily working as a dog walker, but otherwise found herself unemployed after she lost her job as a social worker at a local boys' school. Her family stated that she was looking to turn over a new leaf in her life, and on the day that she vanished, she was planning to make a few changes to her resume, walk her dog, and clean the condo that she was living in. But the mysterious circumstances surrounding her disappearance and her passing started on the previous day. Just before 9 p.m. on the 26th of September, Kaylin called 911 to report that a fight had broken out in a clubhouse near her condo, and that there were firearms involved. Police officers were dispatched to the scene, but when they arrived, they found that a wedding reception was being held in the clubhouse and that there had been no fight. Guests at the reception also assured the officers that there were no firearms in the building, and it was chalked up as an innocent mistake. Kaylin would dial 911 again later that evening, but she hung up without saying anything. When a dispatcher called her back, she stated that she didn't need help, but added that her roommate thought that she was delusional and acting paranoid. The dispatcher would later state that Kaylin seemed confused and that the statements she was making seemed nonsensical. Police officers were sent to her condo to make sure that she was all right, but when they arrived, her roommate told them that she had gone out. The most disconcerting of Kaylin's 911 calls came in the following morning at 8:18 a.m. In the call, which has been released to the public, Kaylin can be heard giving her address to the dispatcher and then repeating it for verification. But while confirming her phone number, she suddenly yells for someone to get out of her house.
No, I don't. I just know that there's an intruder in my house.
You don't know who they are?
No, I don't.
She tells the dispatcher that there's an intruder in her house, but when she asked if she knows the person, she stated that she doesn't, but that she knows there is someone there. She tells the dispatcher that she thinks there's more than one person in her house, since she can hear them talking, adding that she heard one of the intruders saying, "Hey, go in there." She then says that she hasn't actually seen anyone, but that she can hear them taking things from her condo.
Anyone else in immediate danger?
I believe so.
Okay, are you able to get yourself to safety?
I just want to answer that.
When asked whether she was in any danger, she says that she believes she is, and that she's in the back bedroom of the property with no means to get herself to safety. The dispatcher then asks how the intruder got into her house, and she states that there's only one door into the condo, after which she once again yells for them to get out of her house. She's then asked if anyone else is in the building, and she states that she believes her roommate is also there. She says she thinks the intruders are in the condo's front room, and she can then be heard yelling, "Shut up." A few moments later, she states that she thinks the intruders have left, and that she's leaving the room to see if anything has been stolen. At this point, she can be heard talking to her roommate, who tells her that the front door is still locked, and that it would be impossible for anyone to get inside. She also adds that she heard people talking outside of her bedroom window that night before, and she believes that they were canvassing the condo to break in later. When her roommate asks her how anyone could get in while the door is locked, Kaylin replies that she can't explain it, but adds that she heard two people talking inside the condo. Later that day, Kaylin would mysteriously disappear, and when surveillance footage from outside of her condo was checked, the case got even more confusing. The footage shows Kaylin outside her condo as she takes her dog for a walk. But what investigators found strange was the fact that she was walking around during a rainstorm with no shoes on. At one point, she walks into view of the camera with her dog following close behind. What she does next has divided people on what actually is going on in the footage. Some people believe she starts having a conversation, either with someone off camera or someone who isn't actually there. Those who believe she's talking to a non-existent person claims that this indicates that she was delusional and that she was seeing things that weren't actually there. But most people think she stopped to talk to her dog, who had stopped following her for a few moments, and that there was nothing untoward to be seen in the footage. Judging by the hand gestures that she makes in the footage, it seems likely that the latter is indeed the case, since she seems to be gesturing directly at the dog and looking in its direction while talking. She can then be seen walking back in the direction of her condo before moving out of sight of the camera. A while later, she's seen running into the street from the direction of her condo, still wearing no shoes, glancing behind her as she makes her way between the two cars that are parked in the parking lot, nothing more than a misconception. After she disappeared, Kaylin's condo was searched, and it was found that she left her purse, cell phone, and her dog behind. Her family then organized a search of the area, and more than $8,000 was raised to aid in their search efforts, but no sign of Kaylin was ever found. Then, on the 1st of December, workers who were busy inspecting a pipeline in the nearby Jordan River came across a set of remains, and they immediately informed the police. When they arrived at the scene, it was quickly ascertained that it was Kaylin who was found, and her family was informed of the discovery. But the case didn't get any clearer from here. Since Kaylin had been in the water for an extended period of time, the cause of her passing could not be determined, giving rise to even more theories as to how she ended up where she was found. Some people believe that she may have been outside when a flash flood occurred, and that she was caught up in the rushing water, ultimately drowning and ending up in the river where her body was eventually discovered. There's also a theory that she was picked up in a car by someone she knew, and that this person is responsible for her death. But there's no proof whatsoever that this is the case, and it remains just a theory. The difficulty with Kaylin's case is that there's no indication whether she was a victim of foul play, whether or not the weather had a hand in her passing, or whether her state of mind led to her death. There are still very few answers in her case, and it's doubtful that there will ever be any further developments since it occurred almost a decade ago, and the case has since been closed, leaving many questions unanswered. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads.